Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by the following. Indiana University's Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research, presenting Security Matters with tips for improving online security in 3 minutes or less. Main Source Bank, headquartered in Greensburg, Indiana, offering products and services to fit every stage of life. More information at mainsourcebank.com. Main Source, life needs a great bank. Member FDIC and equal housing lender.
Smithville Communications, serving Southern Indiana with high-speed fiber gigabit internet. Smithville Fiber Gigabit Technology. Tap the power.
And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Coming up on Indiana Newsdesk.
When you have large numbers of low-income people living together, it makes it much more difficult for kids, for example, to see employment success modeled.
A new report shows the number of kids in Indiana who live in concentrated areas of poverty has nearly quadrupled over the past decade. How it's impacting all Hoosiers and what experts say we can do to break the cycle of poverty. Some Indiana teachers are spending their summers learning how to use this technology.
The questions just kept coming and coming and coming. It was like opening a box and there's a glow inside, and all of a sudden everybody wanted to peek in.
Could 3D printers in schools be the way to get kids interested in science and technology careers? Plus, big news this week with the state's pre-K efforts. Our StateImpact team shows us which counties were chosen for the pilot program and what happens next in order to get it off the ground by next year. Those stories plus an update on this week's headlines right now on Indiana Newsdesk. Hello, I'm Joe Rennan. Welcome to Indiana Newsdesk. Poverty is prevalent in Indiana. 16% of Hoosiers live below the federal poverty level, but we often don't notice poverty because people with lower incomes are often segregated to certain neighborhoods. And it's happening more often in recent years. U.S. Census Bureau data shows nearly 1 in 4 Hoosiers live in places with high concentrations of poverty. And new research out this week shows 1 in 10 children are in the same situation. That creates unique challenges that include limited access to health care, higher crime rates, and few education opportunities. And as Gretchen Frazee reports, it makes it harder for children to break the cycle of poverty.
Cynthia Nelson considers herself fortunate. She and her 11-year-old daughter Sierra live in Indianapolis in a house that was built through the Fuller Center for Housing, a program similar to Habitat for Humanity. Nelson says most of the people on her street are employed, and the crime rate is relatively low, creating a stable environment where her daughter can grow up. And Nelson has a job working at Fletcher Place Community Center's thrift store. But she wasn't always so fortunate.
There was nothing but chaos, turmoil, just didn't have a direction, didn't even have a need or want to do anything, just follow what everybody else was doing.
When Nelson moved to Indianapolis from Detroit more than 20 years ago, she first lived in shelters, then in a not-so-nice area with a high crime rate, because it's all she could afford. Many Hoosiers are in that same situation. Recent data from the U.S. Census Bureau shows the percent of Indiana residents who live in areas of concentrated poverty has more than doubled in the last decade. 9% of Hoosiers lived in concentrated poverty areas in 2000 compared to 23% in 2010. And children are being impacted particularly hard. Only 3% of kids lived in concentrated poverty areas in 2000. Now, that rate has nearly quadrupled to 11%. Indiana Youth Institute President Bill Stanczykiewicz says when large numbers of low-income people live together, there are inherent problems.
There can be difficulty of accessing information in a neighborhood that is economically segregated. Physically, it can be hard if transportation does not exist to the resources or to the places where the jobs are, or if it's not easy to get to the community college to get the education you need to start moving up the economic ladder.
For parents and their children, there's also a lack of basic amenities, such as grocery stores, internet, and playgrounds.
To not be able to get out and play in parks and have that kind of fun. You don't have a soccer club out here, so you don't have that opportunity. And the safety issue too. You're safer if you stay at home than if you go out and play.
Reverend Jessie Langley runs Fletcher Place, overseeing the food pantry, the center's pre-K program, and the thrift store. She says she's seen poverty become more segregated in the 2 decades she's worked here, and it's taken a toll on the people she serves.
As Indianapolis grows, the cultural trail's great, and we're not that far from Fountain Square, which was listed in New York Times as one of the 52 places to see this year, was Fountain Square in Indianapolis. And so as that happens, you have folks that start moving into that neighborhood then that have money, and so landlords sell houses. The folks that used to live in those houses now get moved somewhere else, and usually further away from Center City and further away from services that they really could use.
Nonprofit organizations like Fletcher Place help ease that transition by providing basic needs, food, clothing, and assistance finding jobs. But many parts of the state, especially rural areas, don't have those kinds of services. And Stanjikevich says poverty can't be eliminated by just meeting people's physical needs.
Even if we somehow magically solved all of those challenges, there's something that's maybe even stronger and more insidious, and that's the emotional destitution that kids feel. The utter hopelessness that just really sinks into their lives. And not that they had hope and they lost it, but they never had hope in the first place. And without that belief that success is for them, that possibility is for them, that opportunity is for them, that their work will matter, and that there's a reward at the end of the process in terms of economic self-sufficiency, even meeting the physical needs of those children will only go so far.
That's what Nelson says was her game changer.
I just got tired of shelters and realized that I could do much better if I just stayed around people who had backbones instead of wishbones.
So Nelson started interacting with more people at Fletcher Place, where people are encouraged to, as Reverend Jessie Langley says, keep moving forward.
On my walk to work, I'll run into teenagers and adults that will stop, and they know me from Fletcher Place. And the first thing they'll do is they'll let me know, one, they were in my preschool, and two, whether they finished high school or not, and where they're at. I don't ask them those questions. The immediate is, I need to let her know how I'm doing, where I'm going, because that's the expectation here.
Certain things you just can't start on.
That's the attitude Nelson says she's trying to pass on to her daughter, and so far it seems to be working. Sierra has her eyes set on becoming a veterinarian.
I'm going to try and do good in school and try and get good enough test scores on the I-STEP and different tests so I can get like a 21st Century Scholarship.
The 21st Century Scholarship Sierra mentioned is a need and performance-based scholarship that's funded by community organizations. A few years ago, the Indiana Commission for Higher Education and the Indiana Youth Institute recently started a new program that provides students who receive the scholarship with a mentor in hopes of increasing the college graduate rates of low-income students. And as we mentioned, concentrated poverty isn't just a big city issue. In fact, the 3 counties with the highest concentrated poverty rates are largely rural. Frank Narwicki joins us now to talk more about what counties and small towns can do to reduce poverty in their areas. He's a lecturer at Indiana University School of Public and Environmental Affairs, and he studies city planning and rural development. Thanks for being here, Frank.
Thank you for having me.
So as we saw in the story, maybe you can take us a little bit further. What is causing, what is that cause of poverty, this concentrated poverty in these small towns across Indiana?
In rural Indiana or semi-rural Indiana, we have some issues going back to the 1980s with manufacturing jobs leaving the area. One example, you could look at city of Marion, Indiana. In 1970, they had a population of about 39,000. Today, they're about 30,000, so they're losing population. People are moving where the jobs are.
And so then what's that ripple effect on those towns when this happens then, and the people who live there?
Well, it affects their tax base. And when the people are leaving, it also affects the school system, which has a long effect on the community. Schools actually have a major part in economic development and stability in the area.
Now, for those people who are living in rural areas and need help, are there services available to them?
There are nonprofit organizations that actually do some work. In southern Indiana, out of Mitchell, Indiana, there's Hoosier Uplands. That's a nonprofit, actually works with Head Start and some other social programs. So there are availability of programs out there.
Does it also force them to look outside of their rural area and having to go to bigger cities? But then transportation might be a issue.
Transportation is usually a problem to go somewhere else. They usually relocate.
We talked in the story about where developers can come in and redesign an entire area. How do we make sure that they're not pushing out the low-income people?
That's a very good point. The issue on this is actually gentrification. That issue actually comes into looking at redeveloping an area, making it so expensive that people that originally were living there could not afford to stay. And what that happens is actually forcing people to leave. One of the techniques to try to use that is in the codes for the community, actually looking at having affordable housing requirements. So if a developer comes in, a certain number of units have to be affordable housing.
And now I hear you're taking a group of students to South Bend in northern Indiana. What's that trip for?
We have a capstone. Our seniors are doing a capstone. This is an online course, so this is unique for us. First time we've done the capstone. Going up to South Bend, looking at a trail possibility and also redevelopment downtown. We'll be presenting to the elected officials and also to the public Monday night.
What are you telling the students?
The students, basically, this is wrapping up their 2-year experience with us in the master's program. This is real life experience. I tend to tell the students it's okay to have some problems happen in the project because we want to see how you react with problems.
All right, well, thank you very much. Appreciate your time today.
Okay, thank you.
Now we go over to Alex Dirkman for a look at this week's top stories.
Thank you, Joe. Indiana has received 245 unaccompanied children who were caught at the U.S.-Mexico border. The children are some of the 57,000 migrant children that have entered the U.S. without their parents since October. They're being placed with sponsors, that's usually a parent or a relative. The sponsor is then required to make sure the child goes to immigration proceedings. A report from the U.S. Health and Human Services Department released Thursday shows nationally more than 30,000 children have been released to sponsors this year. The state is no longer accepting applications for its health insurance program for low-income Hoosiers, known as the Healthy Indiana Plan. The program is paid for with tobacco tax dollars, and state officials say that money is running out. Indiana dropped the eligibility ceiling last year from 200% of the poverty level to 100% because of some HIP participants were eligible for subsidies under the federal health exchange. That allowed the state to open up enrollment. Until now, the state officials are still hoping to expand the program. They're asking the federal government to approve what they're calling HIP 2.0, using federal dollars in place of expanding traditional Medicaid. Democrats say they're hopeful Indiana's right-to-work law won't survive its legal challenge after a judge ruled the law unconstitutional. The law was passed in 2012 despite heavy opposition from union workers. It bans union contracts that require non-union employees to pay fees for representation. A Lake County judge struck down the law in a ruling last week, siding with the United Steelworkers Union against the state. The Attorney General's office is asking the judge to halt the effects of that order until the state Supreme Court takes up the case. I-69 construction crews are working at night again now that a judge has issued a temporary injunction blocking a Monroe County noise ordinance. The ordinance limited noise between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., effectively stopping I-69 construction at night. The Indiana Department of Transportation asked the judge to put a halt to the ordinance, saying it was delaying construction of the interstate. The ruling is a temporary measure, and the larger lawsuit is ongoing. The authors of the original report that detailed the events surrounding the 9/11 terrorist attacks say the next big threat to the United States is cyber terrorism. The commission released a new report assessing current terrorist threats to the United States, as well as updates on the recommendations the committee made 10 years ago. Former Indiana Congressman Lee Hamilton is the vice chair of the commission, and he says 10 years after 9/11, Americans have become complacent.
The first order of business for government is to protect the safety of the American people. And I think we have let our guard down a little, and we must raise the game to protect our people.
Hamilton says the U.S. needs to allocate more resources to ward off cybersecurity threats. And he adds that on-the-ground threats from al-Qaeda and other terrorist and rebel groups are still a major concern. Indiana National Parks revenues were down more than $6 million from 2012 to 2013. They brought in $82 million in 2013 compared to more than $88 million the year before, and attracted about 200,000 fewer visitors. Park officials blame the decline on the government shutdown last October that lasted more than 2 weeks. The Vigo County Superintendent is no longer allowing his employees to lead prayers at school-sponsored events after a national organization warned the district that doing so was unconstitutional. The Freedom from Religion Foundation received a complaint regarding a teacher-led prayer at a school awards banquet, which they then sent a letter to the Vigo County Superintendent telling him teachers are not allowed to lead prayers if acting in an official capacity for the school district. Superintendent Danny Tanous says the school district will still allow students to lead prayers at school events. Local, state, and federal agencies are participating in a mass disaster training program this week to test how well prepared they are to deal with catastrophic events. More than 5,000 military and civilian personnel are gathering at Camp Atterbury, the Muscatatuck Urban Training Center, and the Indiana Government Center in downtown Indianapolis in response to a simulated terrorist attack. The training grounds are designed to be realistic, with fields of debris and civilians acting as victims. And the simulations are going to continue for another 2 weeks as the groups go through a wide range of scenarios, from nuclear explosions to major floods and fires. And Kurt Miller is resigning as the IU women's basketball head coach, effective immediately. In his resignation letter, Miller cites personal health and family as reasons for his decision. And Joe, this is a big loss for the team, and he really made a big impact on IU women's basketball. And in the season before he came, the women only won 6 games, and last season they had a record of 21-13.
And so athletic director Fred Glass says right now the associate coach will act as head coach until they figure out.
And they're working to find someone to fill his place.
Thanks, Alex.
Yes.
Coming up next on Indiana Newsdesk. Teachers are hoping new technology will get kids interested in math and science. What is it, and in which Indiana schools will it be used? And a pilot program provides some low-income parents with a chance to send their children to pre-K. Our StateImpact education team tells us who's eligible and how the preschools are preparing to take on more students. These stories right here on Indiana Newsdesk.
I can change the world with my own 2 hands, make it a better place with my own 2 hands. I'm gonna make it a brighter place with my own 2 hands. I'm gonna help the human race with my own 2 hands. I can hold you in my own 2 hands, and I can comfort you with my own 2 hands.
Welcome back to Indiana Newsdesk. Well, if you keep up on the latest technology, you've probably heard of 3D printing. The innovative manufacturing technology can be used to make everything from medical tools to airline parts. And as Sarah Fenton reports, some Indiana schools are beginning to use it to introduce students to the science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEM fields.
Here's how a 3D printer works. It starts with a computer design that acts as a kind of blueprint.
And we basically take a 3D model and we slice it up into multiple layers, and then we deposit the melted, extruded plastic. In this case, we're using ABS, same material that they use to make Legos.
In just a few hours, the molten material is printed into a usable product, in this case, a set of working gears. Kim Brand calls it a fascinating process to watch, and he hopes it catches the attention of high school students.
The key is not the printer. The printer is just a trick to get kids interested in engineering.
Brand recently started a pilot program through his Indianapolis-based company, 3D Parts Manufacturing. With a grant from the TechPoint Foundation for Youth, 3D Parts Manufacturing is putting small 3D printers in 10 schools across the state as part of a project they're calling Masters of the Universe.
It's going to rotate very fast compared to the other one.
John Davis teaches tech ed at Creekside Middle School in Carmel. He's one of the first teachers to get a printer and says his students pounced on it as soon as it was delivered earlier this year.
The questions just kept coming and coming and coming. It was like opening a box and there's a glow inside, and all of a sudden everybody wanted to peek in.
Davis's goal, and the goal of the Masters of the Universe initiative, is to use 3D printing to interest students in technology fields as part of a nationwide effort to align career paths to the economy's demands. And it's working.
We see applications for connections to so much of the learning that they're doing, not just here, elsewhere in tech ed, but elsewhere in the building. The students were fascinated by the fact that it operates on the same X, Y, and Z coordinates that they use in math class. Then someone else said, does it use the same G codes that we use in CNC machining? Yes, it does.
Only a handful of teachers have gotten to use their printers. Many more plan on getting projects off the ground once the new school year starts. 3D Parts Manufacturing has supplied teachers with a book of lesson plans they can use alongside their existing curriculum. But first, teachers have to learn how to use the new devices.
Do your distance, size of your duct.
Today at IUPUI in Indianapolis, the teachers have become the students. This is one of several workshops being held this summer that shows teachers how to use 3D printers. In these sample projects, students use concepts culled from geometry and computer science to create a computer model that's then fed into the printer. Designs include toys, gears, and small toy animals. While all the teachers here are learning the same thing, when they go back to their schools, they'll come up with ways to make the printers and the projects they're used for their own. At North Davies Community Schools in Elnora, teachers plan on incorporating the printers into their science and math curriculum. Technology coordinator Todd Whitlock hopes the printers will provide some engineering know-how that could lead to lifelong careers for his students.
We all want the same thing for kids, and that's to expose them to new opportunities, and this is a perfect example that lets us do that.
As we mentioned, the program is really just starting to get off the ground, but officials from the company supplying the printers say they're getting so much positive feedback, they're already considering expanding it. Indiana has chosen 5 counties to participate in its pre-K pilot program in the 2015-16 school year. Rachel Morello from our StateImpact education team is here to tell us which counties were selected and how they're preparing for the influx of students that's coming their way.
Thanks, Joe. Low-income parents in Allen, Jackson, Lake, Marion, and Vanderburgh counties will soon be eligible for state funds they can use to send their kids to preschool. Take a look at this map. 4 of the 5 counties have mid to large-sized metropolitan areas. Only Jackson County is considered a rural county, but that's important because state lawmakers say to really test the pre-K program, they need to see if it will work across all demographics and in various parts of the state. Now, parents in those 5 counties can't just send their kids to any preschool and still receive state funding. It has to be one that qualifies in the top 2 tiers of the state's rating system. And part of the work these counties have in front of them before the program launches next summer may include bringing providers up to those standards. We spoke to one of the education consultants for Allen County today, and he says over the next year, he and his counterparts in the other counties will work to recruit eligible families, make room in existing preschools, and secure private donations that will be combined with state funding for the program.
Absolutely. We look at this as that other counties and thousands of children born and yet to be born are looking to us to lead the way, to do a good job of this, to prove that this really works, that it's worth the investment of taxpayer dollars in the long run to have high quality early learning opportunities for all children, especially those from low-income families.
To qualify for assistance, a student's family can earn no more than 127% of the federal poverty limit. That's a little more than $28,000 for a family of 4. And Joe, right now state officials estimate that about 4,000 low-income kids will be served through this program, but that depends on how much private funding they can secure.
Okay, thank you very much, Rachel. It was the last week for campers at Camp Riley in Martinsville. As Casey Kuhn reports, Indiana University researchers say the opportunities these camps give can't be matched.
Kids at Camp Riley all share one trait in common: living with a disability.
I have cerebral palsy.
Camp Riley brings kids together to give them a summer camp experience. Camp Riley even has adapted water skiing so that children who can't use their legs can ride behind a boat in a special ski harness. Counselor Claire Rickenbaugh says these kind of interactions build the children's self-esteem.
There's not a lot of places where they can be like, you know, this is me, this is who I am, and have fun, and they don't have to have the pressure of trying to fit into like their school or anything, because they already fit in here. This is their home.
And the research says so too. The IU study says that these kinds of camps may be a sort of safe haven for disabled children.
It's fun because other kids that doesn't have a disability, we don't want them to play with you because you have a disability, but these kids understand.
And because of how much fun the kids say they have at Camp Riley, the Riley Children's Foundation is now funding an effort to develop ways individual communities can better address the needs of children with disabilities. That's the end of this program, but our work continues online as we cover the news in Southern Indiana throughout the week at WTIUnews.org. Have a great weekend.
Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by the following: Indiana University's Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research, presenting Security Matters with tips for improving online security in 3 minutes or less. Main Source Bank, headquartered in Greensburg, Indiana, offering products and services to fit every stage of life. More information at mainsourcebank.com. Main Source, life needs a great bank. Member FDIC and equal housing lender.
Smithville Communications, serving Southern Indiana with high-speed fiber gigabit internet. Smithville Fiber Gigabit Technology. Tap the power.
And by WTIU members. Thank you.